Pony Express. Check out their line of penetration testing devices, including the Pwn Pad, Pwn Phone, and Pwn Pro. For enterprises, there's Pwn Pulse, providing continuous visibility into wired, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth spectrums across all physical locations, including remote sites and branch offices. For all those hard-to-reach places, there's Pony Express. Visit them on the web at ponyexpress.com. Logarithm's Netmon Freemium delivers real-time network visibility to quickly identify emerging threats in your IT environment. Netmon Freemium is a free commercial-grade network forensics and traffic analytics solution. You can use Netmon Freemium's powerful capabilities to search against all observed network traffic, identify abnormal traffic patterns and application usage, and quickly analyze full packet captures. Take the first step towards real-time network visibility. Visit logarithm.com/freemium to learn more and download it today. Well, welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Make sure you come check out Wild West Hackin' Fest. John, do you have updates for Wild West Hackin' Fest, October 27th and 28th?
We do, actually. The main hotel is currently sold out, but it's in Deadwood, South Dakota. There's tons of hotels, and we have blocks at other hotels as well. Once again, the speaker lineup is absolutely ridiculous. Paul's going to be there. Larry's going to be there. Everyone's going to be there, so you should be too.
Excellent. WildWestHackinFest.com, HACKIN Fest.com. Thomas Fischer is here, and are you like an evangelist, or not really, sort of, kind of,
yeah. I mean, that's basically
celebrity rock star evangelist.
No, not that great yet. I'm trying to be, but not that great. No, I mean, basically, I mean, one of my roles is to talk to customers about how best to look at protecting their data. We talk about threats, but one of the threats comes out to compliance, right, or having to deal with legislation, because that kind of affects the way that you're going to actually monitor or what you're going to do to protect that data. I also have a role of just fixing things in the company. So when something breaks or somebody does something wrong,
you're the firefighter.
Yeah, I'm the firefighter.
I gotcha.
So
it's interesting. We were talking earlier, and we mentioned it in your line of work in security, right? Those questions come up. And how do you help people answer those questions where you're like, well, what constitutes sensitive data in your environment? Where does it live? Who owns it? Where does it travel? Who has access? And how do you maintain that access? I mean, that's essentially, and compliance will drive a lot of that. But I also feel like that's the foundation for a really awesome security program.
It is, and the problem is that most customers don't know, right? And when you talk to the IT guys, it's the business that's the data owner, and they should know where the data is. When you talk to the business, the IT manages the data, so they should know where it is. Nobody really knows where the data is, and it becomes more complex when you're facing, legislation like GDPR, which really specifies what data you need to protect and how you. It doesn't specify how you're supposed to protect it, but it specifies the safeguards that you need to be able to be accountable for to make sure that if you do get breached and if you do get a data leak, you don't get fined. Right?
So, like, Verizon probably would be in a lot of trouble for leaving data out on S3.
Yeah, and
that might be an issue.
It might be an issue.
The funny thing is, it's not just Verizon. If it had European data, it wouldn't just be Verizon; it'd be the partner as well. And potentially Amazon, but I don't think Amazon would actually get fined, because they've actually they can prove it. They've given the tools and the means
they absolutely have
to the companies to actually protect the data. So, but and that's one of the things that's funny is that this legislation is coming out, and it came out, and it goes into force next year. But they actually define the data, like the data owner versus the data processor. So you have that aspect of identity. They've realized that one company just isn't the only person touching your data, right? You might be the controller, so the person who actually collects the data and wants to use it. But you might have data processors in the back which are storing and actually protect. Well, they're storing and managing the data as well. So they have defined that aspect of. There are different parties involved in this whole sequence of data manipulation. That becomes interesting because a lot of the time, I mean, you mentioned Verizon, but it's not just Verizon. There was I think it was about a year ago, there was a Michael Page incident as well that came out, right? It was a big deal because it was literally like thousands and thousands of CVs because Michael Page is basically a recruitment company in Europe, right? I think they have offices in New York as well, but they were working with a third party. They were migrating all their services to the cloud, quote unquote. And during that migration, what they did is they backed up all the applications, put some tar gzips into place, put them in an S3 bucket, and it just sat there.
That's been happening a lot lately.
Yeah.
It's an increasing trend.
It is an increasing trend, and it's a big problem, right? Because if you're not actually applying monitoring and taking a look at what your partners are doing and what your supply chain is doing, that whole sequence of things comes into play. And if you're actually manipulating data in that sequence of things, who's actually in control?
And even if it's happening all under the same umbrella, John, how many times on a penetration test, and we were talking about this briefly this week with Jason Wood, have you gone in and everyone thinks that pen testing and hacking is this mysterious, mythical black art. But how many times you walk in and been like, oh yeah, you left a pile of sensitive data right there. There's a zip file on an open share. How often does that happens quite often, right?
Yeah, we just as a narrative, we had a test that we were talking to the customer last week. Customer was kind of frustrated. Fairly large financial institution, and Bo and Derek were doing the test, and they were able to password spray their OAuth portal, gain access to email accounts. From the email accounts, they were able to then get access to internal computer systems. Got access to internal computer systems, pivoted, found a sensitive file that had a bunch of user IDs and passwords, and they were able to take over the entire organization. Customer approaches us and says, well, you guys didn't use any exploits. I go, what? Yeah, you guys didn't use Metasploit to exploit anything. I don't think this is valid if you didn't exploit something. It's just unfortunately that happens quite often.
Does GDPR present an opportunity for organizations to not succumb to what John is talking about and really raise awareness that security is not just protecting yourself from exploits, that it's actually managing your data? Is part of it, a huge part of it.
So I'm going to go a bit of a rant here because I'm kind of a bit of a curmudgeon as well. But, I see all these, and we'll probably see this a lot of Black Hat too, all these companies saying, we can offer you GDPR compliance help.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be a huge theme in Black Hat.
There is no compliance in GDPR. Not in the sense, define compliance, right? If you define compliance and you think about when you talk to CISOs and people like that, it's like PCI compliance, I'm doing that checklist, I've got all those things in place. GDPR actually doesn't have a checklist, right? They don't actually tell you have to do this or that. They give you specific they give you a specific framework saying that you have to protect the data and you're accountable for the data that you're collecting. And it's all about accountability. Now, that said, they do have they will have, and they have provisioned for a certification. So but it's an ISO type standard certification, so like a 27K type certification. So you can actually get certified eventually once they've set up the organizations to say that I'm doing the right things and I'm documenting my process and I know where my data is and I know how my data is being manipulated and then I can get my certification. And that will just help you if you do get a breach to avoid the fines. Because, I don't know if you looked at the fines, but they're really heavy.
See, and I think that's the better way to go. Rather than trying to create a compliance framework, it's there's lots of them out there. Pick one. And just make it, like you said, an accountability framework. It's if you do screw up, we're going to levy massive fines on your company. I think that's going to work so much better than just trying to set up some kind of other compliance stuff.
Well, because when you set up a standard, everyone just wants to meet the standard and then they stop.
Yeah.
With GDPR, what I like is they're like, you need to protect your data. And so the organization can't be like, well, we're just going to do this and stop. They're like, no, we need to always protect our data to avoid the fines, which that can help.
And there's some interesting things in it, right? So, when I talk to customers or even I did a presentation at BSides in Europe, one of the things that I mention is that there actually is no technical wording inside inside GDPR. The only real technical word that you can find is pseudo anonymization. And yes, that is a word. I've been asked it a few times here in the US. I was training our sales engineers on GDPR that last week.
What is the
pseudo anonymization?
Pseudo anonymization?
Pseudo anonymization. There's no anon, so it's pseudo anonymization.
Okay. What does that mean?
It means basically you need to be able to I won't say obfuscate, but you need to be able to break down the data so that you can no longer identify somebody with it.
I gotcha.
So, there's a lot of people say, well, we can encrypt the data. Yes, that's one of the, examples that GDPR gives as a way to pseudo-anonymize data. But you don't need to encrypt, because if you do encrypt, you need to manage the keys. The keys have to be managed.
The key becomes the differentiator between what you're storing and...
If you're doing pseudo-anonymization well enough, you can actually break down the data that you're bringing in and completely obfuscate any of the personal information. And you can do that because the other part of what GDPR says is that you shouldn't be collecting more than you have to. Right? You should only be collecting what you need to have to process the personal data, and that's a big sort of for like U.S. companies. And this does affect U.S. companies because they have they want to apply this globally to any company that does business in the EU.
Do you have to do business in the EU or just store data about citizens living in the EU?
No, it's an EU citizen living in the EU. So
if I have their data,
if you have their
if
data.
I'm in the US, I still have to.
Yeah, you're still potentially liable for the fines. How they're going to collect them, that's a different problem. But think about it from the perspective of, I'm a big company. I sell products to the Europeans. I've got a data breach. I'm not going to do anything about it because it doesn't really affect me. They'll never be able to find me. But reputation, the harm on your reputation, the ability to actually do business in Europe might be impacted.
What constitutes data? Like name, email, phone?
That's a good question.
City, state, zip.
So you've got name,
let's
emails.
Let's just say you were collecting that as part of a webcast and storing that data.
Like
Not that
no.
here at all.
So let's be correctly right. It's an opt-in. That's another big problem for U.S. companies. We're going into it's an opt-in. It's not an opt-out. So you have to, as a company, you have to specifically and explicitly tell the user what data you're collecting, how you're collecting it, and what you're going to do with it, and they have to consensually opt in, and you have to prove that they consensually opt in.
Yep.
Now, personal data is, like I said, name, date of birth, address, because in Europe, postcodes can be an individual house. That's really IP addresses. This is the first time that legislation has actually mentioned online presence. So all your social media stuff, all your IP addresses, coming with IPv6 is even more important. The IMEI. Right, your phone identifier, that is personal data because it can explicitly identify you as a person. Then there's other aspects too, so genetic and biometric data, racial type profiling. So there's some data that you're even not allowed to collect unless it's under specific control of a regulatory body or a government agency. So things like race, religion, sexual preferences, union memberships. And things like that. So there's very sensitive data that's you're not even allowed to collect as a company unless you're doing it for specific governmental purposes. There's also aspects of I lost track of what I was saying. It's just anything. Essentially, what you need to think about it is anything that you can take to identify an individual. That's the underlying problem, and that individual has control of his data, right? So if he doesn't want you to have the data anymore, you have to be able to respond to that request and say, okay, I'm erasing all your data. And that's another aspect. The whole legislation is about bringing back control of personal data to the person who owns me. Like I own my data, so I can do what I want with it. And you have to respond in kind as a company.
It's interesting. It's very interesting. So how do you see this playing out at Black Hat? Like when folks are attending Black Hat and evaluating vendor solutions on this topic, like what are some things they should look for? How do you easily dismiss a vendor and be like, oh, that's just kind of snake?
So, I mean, the ones that are going to push you, we can help you be compliant. I don't see how that's possible because unless they're certifying you, which they can't because it has to be an official regulatory body that certifies you. The other part is any aspects of compliance to the legislation happens after the breach when they audit you because they've done they do a risk assessment on you. They check that you did do what you said you did, things like that. But like I've seen, so I was at InfoSec Europe a couple of weeks ago, which is the
RSA of
it's a small event, but you have most of the major vendors. Most of them will be here at Black Hat as well, and they all go like, I saw a bunch of SIM vendors. We can help you be GDPR compliant.
How does that work?
How does that work? Exactly how?
Based on what you just described, which is more detail than I've gotten on GDPR, so thank you for that.
How is a SIM going to tell you what personal data you're storing, where it's being stored, and how it's being stored? Right?
They can totally automate it, the whole thing.
Machine learning.
They use AI and APIs with machine learning.
Yeah, exactly.
In real time.
So
in real time.
I'm just like dumbfound, right? And there's a lot of companies that are like saying, yeah, we'll do that, but none of them. if I was still in the enterprise, what I'd be doing, I'd be going out to the companies, are you focused on data? Mm-hmm. What do you do with, do you actually detect, see, understand what data is, right? Because if you don't understand what data is, you can't really help me you can't help me try to, be, I'll say compliant in terms of be able to avoid any fines if I get breached, right? Mm-hmm. The other aspect too is I'd look for companies that can help you do incident response in a really timely manner. So under GDPR, you have to report an incident. Well, you have to report a data breach within 72 hours. And it's not just you have to report. You have to report that you've been breached. You have to report what was stolen, who it impacts, what potential impact to that person might be. So what could happen to that person, and what remediation actions you're taking to stop it from happening again, and to help basically your customers or your users to against any potential impact. So if you think about that, I mean, like incident response toolkits, yeah, great, but they look at the breach mechanism.
Yeah.
They look at how did it happen, but.
So Yahoo definitely wouldn't fall in compliant with that reporting structure.
No.
Probably not.
Probably
no.
It's like years later.
The funny thing is, I think the only person who could potentially do that is Troy Hunt. He'd be able to tell you exactly what was taken.
I know where my data is because I'm friends with Troy.
Right.
I think Troy should launch a new campaign, GDPR Compliance.
Oh, that's funny.
No, I mean it's going to be really tough on companies, and what I've been seeing is a lot of going back to where my data is, and that's the biggest task that they have to take on right now.
Yes.
I've heard companies complain, but it's coming next May 2018. We only have like 6 months to do it. It's like they voted that law in March of 2016. Mm-hmm. You've had 2 years to take care of it. Actually, a little bit more than 2 years to take care of it, right?
Interesting.
So, and people don't.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting because you still have a lot of people that think that it's a compliance standard, that they can somehow buy a product or they can get into some type of governance or compliance framework that's going to just make it for them. I think it's going to be a hell of a wake-up call if they realize that it's pretty much just a responsibility framework more than anything else.
But accountability, it is about accountability. And they specifically mentioned that the board is accountable, that the board and the CEO have to name what they call a data protection officer in certain cases. So the cases depend on if you are a public organization in Europe, it means something related to government. Mm-hmm. If you're processing certain types of data, if you're processing certain volumes of data and things like that, and the DPO is the face of the organization versus data protection activities, breach notifications. And he's the one who's going to be standing in front of the press saying, well, we've been breached and this is what happened, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there was a report like last year from some of the top consultancy firms. There was a need for a ridiculous amount of tens of thousands of DPO officers across the world because of the requirements and things like that. And it's not going to be satisfied. So we started seeing in Europe virtual DPO services, which is good if you're a small company. You don't need that much.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So somebody who will drive that plan of actions and logging, registering, and documenting what actions you're taking to protect the data, what's data you're actually storing. Some of the things that then I stepped down and I talked to some of the IT teams. And it's like, what are you doing about your opt-in clauses? What are you doing about the data you're gathering? Are you regularly monitoring that it's being used for the purposes that you said you were going to use it for? Because in the past, a lot of applications just gather the data. Now you have to kind of say, okay, I don't need this data, so I'm not going to gather it anymore. Let me see. We're not using it anymore. We have to get rid of it. Mm-hmm. That's another part of GDPR, right? If you're not using it anymore, you should be getting rid of it or pseudonymizing it to make it no longer recognizable. Then the aspects you have to deal with is that personal control of data, right? So you've got the right to be forgotten, which is basically I can call you and say, remove all my information from your systems. So you have to be able to know exactly where that one person's information is across the systems.
I can see that being problematic for a lot, just using the internet.
Yeah.
But the amount of things that you sign up for and and whatnot.
Imagine Facebook.
Well, a lot of companies they don't make it easy for you to destroy your data or even your account.
But I mean,
they don't want you to.
They don't want you to because they need the data, right? The whole thing of they're gathering data is because they want to do big data analytics in the background, right?
Yeah,
they want to.
Yes, they want to keep your data and they want your account to maintain be active, so that when we go to investors, they can say with this many users.
But if you go back to private organizations, think about your backup strategies, right? So you got online, nearline, offsite. How the hell do you get rid of the data that's offsite?
Yeah, on a tape somewhere.
Yeah.
Do they still do tape?
Yeah.
No.
I don't know.
A lot of it's
I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
I just throw everything to the cloud and hope it's secure.
That's it.
And there's also the data portability. So I can, if I decide, like if I have an insurance, if I have an insurance contract or I'm in private health, and I decide I'm going to change my provider, I can ask that company to give me my data in a machine-readable format, so I can transpose it to another account.
That's interesting.
Same problem. How do you make sure that you're only extracting that one person's data?
Yeah.
Right. And then there's just this whole aspect of you have to be able to re-notify your users if you're changing the data that you're collecting or if you're changing the way that you're processing that data.
Right.
Which enacts that you need to have somebody who actually understands what the business is doing with the data. Right? It's no longer just segments of IT is collecting the data, business is doing something with the data. You have to have that complete vision of what's happening with that data. So there's a lot of things that are going on. And then
how do I notify my users if they've opted out and it's an anti-spam law that prevents me from contacting them? Am I in a catch-22?
No, I mean if you've opted out, you shouldn't be collecting the data.
Right.
So the idea is that if you opt in, then you collect the data. If you opt out, you can't collect the data. Right. So if I come to
get rid of it, that's going to be problematic.
Yeah. So it's the same problem. Remember when the European Union insisted on having those stupid cookie laws, right? So, well, they're not stupid, but I think they're stupid because they really annoy me now because it's just every website you go to nowadays. It's just like we have to do a cookie and blah blah. You accept this cookie.
Annoying. Yeah.
But it's part of that, right? If you think about it, some cookies actually collect personal data, right? So you have that aspect of, well, how am I going to deal with this as an enterprise, right? What am I going to do? Well, if somebody opts out, I'm just not going to bother, right? I'll just give them access to the data they want. I won't collect anything. I won't log anything, etc. But that complicates your application, right?
Big time.
So that's a solution that I haven't really, when I talk to the IT guys, it's like they don't know how to handle that because it's really difficult. So you've got to come up with a compromise somewhere. And that's where you kind of have to work with a DPO. You have to work with the project teams and understand exactly what you're doing. Potentially, you should be working with a lawyer because it's all legal.
Yeah.
So
it's about risk.
It's about risk, right? Yeah.
Well, that is fascinating. I didn't know that it delved that deep down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, it goes really deep.
Thank you for shining light. We're going to take a break now and come back and talk about monitoring infrastructure with Nagios and some other products. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.